Hey guys. What I want to do for homework tonight is I'm feeling a little pressed on how much we need to do to finish and get through World War II, as much as we can before Pesach. So, what I'd like to do is I'm going to do a couple of evening sessions of just little 15, 20-minute lessons that will move us forward so we can talk more specifically in class and hopefully not be quite as rushed in class. Um, the to pick up where we left off today, just to give you a sense of, there's the slide on Buchenwald, is to continue on with that notion of what we knew and when we knew it. The St. Louis has been nicknamed, I think there might have been a film about this, called The Voyage of the Damned. And if you see down below here, there is a clip where you can click it, and it'll take you to this animated map. And this is phenomenal. You can basically, you can see down here, there's a button you can sort of tap, and it'll walk you through and the journey of the folks on the St. Louis. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. You can ask questions about it tomorrow. I think by the time you look at this and watch that little film, you'll have enough. Suffice it to say, we had an opportunity to save a group of people who literally were not just in Europe trying to get to the United States. They literally sailed by our coast. If you look here, they sailed up the coast of Florida around Miami, and we don't let them in. And that's because our restrictions in our policies were such that we did not see the need to allow them to enter the United States. Unfortunately for the folks on the St. Louis, of the 620 passengers, it's estimated, what does it say here, 254 passengers in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands after the date died during the Holocaust. So it's a really, really terribly sad story. And yet, if you look, 83% of Americans at this time were unwilling to adapt any of our restrictions on immigration because we just did not see or feel the need to do so. So picking up with where we left off here, we've got over here, you've got the Rhineland, and you should know where these areas are. So here, if you look, there's this is the area of the Rhineland there. I don't know what I was doing with that little thing there. Cut that baby out. Down here, you've got Austria. Here is the Sudetenland. And as we said, that was in the Munich agreement, that this is all he wanted. Well, in March of 39, Hitler clarifies for us that is not, in fact, all he wanted. Czechoslovakia had known it. Czechoslovakia had warned us, and it was very clear that they were next. So when they invade in March of 39, I don't think anybody was stunned. And once Czechoslovakia, all pretense of he was planning to stop were gone. And if you take a look at who's next, boom, boom, boom. If I were Poland, I would have been freaking out, especially since you've got Germany divided here. And if you look, Poland, part of what they did here with the Free City of Danzig was they had created during the Treaty of Versailles access for them to get to the sea, the Baltic Sea. And it was very clear that this was unacceptable to the Germans, and they wanted it. So by March of 39, the army comes marching in. By the 15th, German troops poured into Czechoslovakia, and within a matter of days, the country of Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. The Germans were everywhere. They began immediately setting out to, establish total control of the area. So at this point, it was very clear what was next. Poland, because at this point, this will all be shaded in green here. Poland was clearly on everyone's mind. And within a few months, this was March, by September, Germany will just unrelentingly pour into Poland. Now, what's fascinating about Poland, and about September 1st, 1939, being the start of World War II, it's a period when they're still under this sort of delusional mentality, and that somehow the Germans just believe if they say something enough times and loudly enough that we're going to just eventually believe it. And they actually tried to spin, as part of their rhetoric, Poland invaded Germany. This is the spin the foreign ministers will first come out with, is the reason why they went in at 4:45 a.m. was because Poles had invaded Germany. Now, what we know they did was, we know that Germans crossed the border illegally, went in behind the lines, shot up some Polish soldiers, drugged the bodies across the border, dropped them at the border, and said, "Look, the Poles have invaded. let's go. And that became their rationalization or justification for their invasion. They issued a 16-point ultimatum, which was very clearly just, to give some sort of ruse of legitimacy to the invasion. But they moved in. You can see within the first hours, there are already bodies starting to pile up. They destroyed cities. They had adopted, and the Germans will use in this early part of the war, something called blitzkrieg. A blitzkrieg is, if you think in football, what a blitz is an all-out, like defensive. The defensive go on an all-out attack against the offense, right? You go on sort of on an offensive tactic, and that's what blitzkrieg. A blitz is an all-out attack. It's total war, everything from tanks, infantry, air power, manpower. Fast. It is forceful. It is overwhelming. General Fuller gave an account, and when asked about it by a local German newspaper, he said, speed and still more speed and always more speed was the secret. That demanded audacity, more audacity, always audacity. So here is a map of Poland, and you can see Warsaw sits here at the center of Poland. They're going to basically come in where these arrows are. And if you look at the other map here, it gives you a sense of just the overwhelming presence, the overwhelming areas of strikes that are coming at them. And within a matter of time, this is where Warsaw sits. Warsaw will collapse. Again, lightning warfare, just some panzers versus panzers are the tanks that they use versus the Polish cavalry, which was their greatest military weapon that they had. So you can actually, I think there's a couple pictures here. Here's the Polish cavalry sort of fighting against them. And these are all the German tanks in this picture. Here's some more pictures of tanks. Those are the Stukas, the dive bombers. Here are some other pictures. And these are all there. You see the Polish cavalry sort of riding out to fight against the panzers. I mean, it's not shocking. It was overwhelming. By September 3rd, both Britain and France will declare war on Germany. They had a previously arranged alliance with Poland and had told Poland, if you are attacked, we will step in. Britain, aware of the aggressive nature of the regime, the Nazi regime, began Operation Pied Piper almost immediately. Operation Pied Piper is where, over the course of the first, year or two, but even in the first 4 days, they are going to move 3 million children out of London and major English cities into the countryside because they were so fearful at the potential of the German attack. These kids will go on without parents, unsupervised only in the sense that they set up whole camps out of the countryside in Britain. And these kids will go out and they will live out in these camps. Some will live with families, some will go out to work on farms. There were all kinds of different programs that had to bring kids out there. But it was tough. It's family separation. But for the families in Britain, it was seen as the only thing they could really do. Because they were so concerned about the coming of the attack. As the Nazis will show, their attack on the Poles is devastating. Within a matter of days, they basically take over. It says the Polish defense pretty much collapsed in 2 days. Danzig, the city, will fall by the 7th of September, a week after bombardment. 65,000 Polish troops are killed. Hundreds of thousands are captured and wounded. And within the month, by September 28th, the city of Warsaw will surrender and collapse, and the Polish state no longer existed. And it was so fast, it was so overwhelming that it's like that we couldn't even get our heads around what was happening, that a major European country would fall with just, no almost resistance, seeming resistance whatsoever. This next thing is just so beyond me. If you recall back to the non-aggression pact, we may have referred to it the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the same name, both appropriate names, interchangeable names actually. It's the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or non-aggression pact was a secret treaty between the Nazis and the Soviets that basically they're going to divide Poland. So if you look here at the map, you've got the division of Poland. Actually, if you go back on the previous picture of a map, I think it's 2-3 pages back. Let's go back to this one here. And before that, now what? Oh gosh, where was it? Okay, here. If you look at the one where we started the first of class with March of 39, see how it's divided between the yellow and the green? It's actually really easy to see here. That is the dividing line of where where the Soviets and the Nazis had agreed to divide the country. And so what ultimately happens is, as soon as Warsaw collapses and the country no longer exists, you've got massive forces are going to hit on the 17th of September, because again, Poland already had a peace treaty with the Soviets, a non-aggression pact with the Soviets. So as long as Poland existed and Poland was in some sort of legitimate sense, they were bound by their treaty. But as soon as Poland, the nation, was no longer, and the government had escaped and evacuated out of the city and had collapsed, they considered the treaty to be void, and the USSR will use that and that excuse to sort of move in and come from that side, or from the east. Again, it was as aggressive, and don't be under the impression that just because we will eventually be siding with the Soviets, this is a perfect example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They were not a friend during this. They were not an honest broker. Anybody who is ruled by Stalin and controlled by Stalin is not going to be a great country to be, long-term in a long-term relationship with. However, we're going to see that the Baltic states, and you should know these: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, This is where the Soviets are going to move into these three states on the Baltic here, and they are going to set up an occupation. Even after the war, all through the Cold War until 1989, the Soviets will stay there. And until the collapse of the Soviet Union, they will control and claim the Baltic states as a legitimate part of the Soviet Empire. And it all started back in World War II when they seized it as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So we'll talk about this when we get to the Cold War unit in the next unit. But again, it's just an overwhelming presence. It's interesting that I think that we tend to, forget, because they were our ally at different points during the war, that some of the brutality during the war committed by the Soviets was as bad as that committed by some of the attacks by the Nazis. I'm not talking about necessarily the Holocaust, but I'm talking about just military battles. In 1943, these are Polish prisoners under the Soviets. There was, at this point in 1943, so jump ahead a little bit, the Nazis are going to control most of Poland. They're going to have pushed the Soviets all the way back, and they're going to control most of Poland. When they got to the city of Smolensk, right outside of Smolensk, the Nazis are going to uncover mass graves of what were about 20,000 Polish officers that had been killed by the Soviets during the Soviet occupation of Poland. We know this is a Soviet guard here executing 2 Polish soldiers. The bodies were found. They had been in a very shallow earthen grave out in a forest just outside of Smolensk, the Katyn forest. And the Nazis are going to use this as part of their propaganda to say, here are people siding in our opposition with the allies of the United States and Britain and France, who are mass murders. Look at these graves. Now, again, obviously they're not recognizing, acknowledging what they're doing to the Jews, but they're trying to use this as a propaganda coup to say, look at this. These Soviets and these Bolsheviks are terrible. Look what they've done to these Polish people. It's not us. We did this. Well, all that does is mean the Soviets will come back and say, we didn't do that. You did it. You're trying to pin it on us. So for years, there's going to be fighting back and forth. Who was responsible for the massacre at the Katyn forest? We've done they've exhumed the bodies. They've looked at them. It's very clear these were atrocities committed by the Soviets, because the Soviets were by no means good guys in that sense. There's just a series of cartoons that I want to sort of point out for you. And if you look at this first one, it says, number 1, it says, this is obviously Hitler, the scum of the earth, I believe. And then here's Stalin responding, bloody assassin of the workers, I presume. And then you've got Poland kind of laying between them. You've got another one here that shows the fated relationship between Hitler and Stalin. The swastika and the hammer and sickle here, and the caption on the cartoon is, "Wonder how long the honeymoon will last." I love that cartoon. Mostly it's the stash on Stalin that cracks me up. Here you've got Poland coming back to be surprised by Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia waiting for them. And the last is, the celebration of the two sort of dancing over, doing a three-legged race. And they're kind of stepping over all these nations that they're crushing together. In the United States, we are going to adopt very quickly an America First policy. Some of the phrases: we should till our own soil. The poor devils, referring to Europe, have never gotten together since the fall of Rome. European involvement is not our destiny. And the big leader of this America First movement was a man named Charles Lindbergh. Now, you may remember Charles Lindbergh as the pilot of the Spirit of St. Louis. He will parlay this singular sort of mechanical feat and bravery to a quasi-political career. He's not going to run for political office. He's going to be independently wealthy based on sort of what happens as a result of his flight. But he will be an adamant isolationist and really does have a dalliance with fascism. He really admired what Hitler had been able to do in Germany. I've never seen necessarily direct correlations to anti-Semitism of Lindbergh. It could be there. It just I may be unaware of it. He certainly was not immune to the general anti-Semitism of the day, which is sort of the idea of possibility of Jewish conspiracy of bankers. But in terms of being like the Father Coughlin in the United States or Hitler in Europe, he wasn't this sort of raging anti-Semite. One of the quotes he says, if any one of these groups, the British, the Jewish, or the administration, stops agitating for war, I believe there will be little danger in our involvement. So he basically says the only reason we would ever get involved in war is it's the fault of the British, the Jews, or FDR. Keep U.S. out of the war, be neutral. Because we don't get involved, because we fail to respond, in some ways, our lack of response and unwillingness to even consider engagement discourages Britain and France from taking a harder line, because without us backing them and with all the neutrality legislation that we've put in place and kind of boxed ourselves in, we kind of limit what their ability to, how they can respond. So there is a indirect sort of result of our lack of involvement. After the invasion of Poland, it was very clear we had to do something, that the Nazis were coming. The Neutrality Act of 1939 is when we passed the cash and carry policy. This is a special session of Congress debating for a few weeks. We were really limited by what we can do by those acts that came, by those neutrality laws that came out of the Nye Commission. We couldn't sell war material to the Allies, but, we could certainly give it to them in cash as long as it wasn't through a loan. No loans, no shipping losses, but we got to help out Britain and France. And so in some ways, we were able to claim sort of a moral victory, an economic victory. All these orders that we're going to have is going to help bring us out of the depression that we're in. We're going to see some economic, boost there from that. So here you've got U.S. aid to Britain. Again, a couple of Dr. Seuss cartoons, all out aid to our allies, U.S. Neutrality Act. And I think that what you start seeing is that there is in this country a concern about what's going to happen here. Very quickly, I'm just going to finish up. The Soviets are also going to invade Finland. So up north, this is going to be a winter war that basically is going to take place in the snow. Again, illegal action. They're going to be expelled from the league because of this. Finland is eventually going to collapse. They're going to try as best they can to resist, but again, against the onslaught of this, sort of powerful force that the Soviets had, it was unable to resist. The Soviets wanted this land. There was a lot of natural resources and industrial capacity. Plus, they believed it allowed them to better protect Leningrad. Leningrad is a northern city here, and they're very concerned about, as much as they're not going to articulate it, they're very concerned about protecting Leningrad in that city. But these concessions to the Soviet Union are going to be pretty significant by the Soviet Union, or to the Soviet Union, will be pretty significant. In terms of France, this is the last thing we'll do. There was something called the Maginot Line. Now, if you recall, World War I was a trench warfare. in which you still could see all over Europe. You could see these sort of, remnants of the trenches that had been fought back from the Great War. Well, in a plan to try to get ahead of any potential conflicts, they were very concerned that the Soviets were going to sweep through this area of the Rhineland, or the Nazis were going to sweep through this area of the Rhineland. So they ended up creating this massive fortification known as the Maginot Line. Okay, and here's the French-German boundary. You can see it right there. It's coming right up in this area. They had taken this area, the Alsace-Lorraine. They created this whole line of concrete fortifications, obstacles, with this idea that they were going to be able to stop any kind of attack, tanks, infantry, that they could basically use what they had learned in World War I to stop any kind of attack. This is, on this map here, you see a sense of what some of the Maginot Line barricades were like. I mean, this is extraordinary. They have everything from hangars to pillboxes to airlocks. I mean, you could store people there, you could put your army down there, and they were basically believed, if you look on the side, tape traps, barbed wire entanglements, anti-aircraft guns, that they literally put this massive fortification up with the idea that there's no way the Nazis will ever be able to invade. Here are the anti-tank measures. Here's some of the pillbox up here. Here are where they would put these fences up where you couldn't just, you had to drive on a narrow road and you could only open it. These here are, again, more anti-tank measures. And if you look here at the bottom, you've got this kind of the fields and how it was laid out. Well, all I can say about the Maginot Line is you can still go see parts of it today. But if this is where you're heavily fortified and you're Germany looking to invade France, is this where you're going to go? Probably not. All they do is sweep through the Benelux countries again, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And that will pretty much be how they do their attacks. So I'm going to stop here. We'll pick up with the Nazi assault tomorrow, the Nazi assault on Denmark and Norway. We're at 22 minutes, so hopefully it's not too long. Take notes, please. Any questions that you have, post these questions to the Google Doc so I know what your questions are, and I can start with those tomorrow. We'll spend a couple minutes answering those, and then we'll move on. Okay, bye.